Why do some leaders succeed through bold proclamations, while others triumph by staying silent? The answer lies in understanding when to roar like a lion and when to stalk like a shadow. History and folklore are filled with examples of leaders whose words inspired armies and struck fear into their enemies. But it is also full of cautionary tales, moments when bold declarations reveal too much and set the stage for their downfall. The key lies in knowing when to speak and when to act. The proverb, "A roaring lion kills no game," teaches us that making too much noise can stop you from succeeding. Just like a lion's loud roar can scare away its prey, showing off or talking too much can give away your plans and make things harder. This idea is clear in the story of Charles XIII of Sweden and Peter the Great of Russia. This story serves as a stark reminder: to control the narrative is to control the battle. But when words replace action, even the strongest can find themselves undone. In the early 18th century, Charles XIII of Sweden, known as the Lion of the North, was Europe's most audacious and feared general. His military campaigns had been marked by boldness and swift victories, and he had built a reputation as a brilliant tactician. Before every campaign, Charles delivered fiery speeches to his troops, not only rallying their spirits, but also declaring the invincibility of Sweden and mocking the supposed weaknesses of his enemies. These speeches became legendary, not just for their inspiration, but for their dangerous lack of restraint. Unlike the careful, calculated leaders of his time, Charles didn't believe in holding back his intentions. He often boasted publicly about his plans and the outcomes he envisioned, feeding his soldiers confidence, but also unintentionally providing his enemies with a roadmap to his next moves. The overconfidence of the lion. In 1708, Charles launched one of his most ambitious and ultimately catastrophic campaigns, an invasion of Russia. Prior to setting out, he made a series of bold proclamations that echoed across Europe. Moscow will fall before the current season is out. Charles confidently claimed that his army would march straight to Moscow, defeat Peter the Great's forces in a decisive battle, and bring Russia to its knees. He made no attempt to hide his ambition, turning his campaign into a widely anticipated spectacle. Peter's army is no match for Swedish steel. In his speeches, Charles openly mocked the Russian army, portraying them as poorly trained, weak and incapable of standing against Sweden's disciplined forces. This rhetoric not only rallied his troops, but also spurred Peter to prove him wrong. Charles's speeches, designed to inspire confidence, became a double-edged sword, cutting both ways. While his bold proclamations rallied his troops and struck fear in his enemies, they also bound him to his promises. By publicly committing to such grandiose goals, he left himself little room to manoeuvre if things went wrong. His boasts echoed across Europe, giving Peter the Great ample warning of his intentions. Worse, his own soldiers and the Swedish people began to see these goals as inevitable, creating immense pressure for Charles to deliver on his promises no matter the cost. But these declarations had a cost. The very words that inspired his army and intimidated his opponents turned into the shackles that confined his strategy, forcing him into a rigid course of action. In stark contrast to Charles's flamboyant approach, Peter the Great was a man of action and few words. While Charles made loud proclamations about his march to Moscow, Peter worked quietly behind the scenes. He understood that Russia's vast geography, harsh climate and resilient population were his greatest advantages. Rather than counter Charles's boasts with his own, Peter focused on preparation, gathering intelligence, and crafting a strategy of attrition. Scorched earth strategy. Peter ordered his forces to burn villages, destroy crops, and evacuate towns as they retreated. This ensured that Charles's army would find no supplies or shelter as they advanced. Logistical misdirection. Peter allowed rumours to spread that he was concentrating his forces near Moscow, but in reality, he was fortifying positions further south, where he planned to deliver a decisive blow. Study of Charles's speeches. Russian scouts and spies closely monitored Charles's public declarations. They noted his fixation on reaching Moscow quickly and used this knowledge to anticipate his movements and overextend his supply lines. This forced Charles's army to march deeper into Russian territory without the logistical support they needed. The harsh Russian winter was also approaching, and Peter used this to his advantage by making the Swedish forces face the full brunt of the cold. Charles's army, although larger and well-trained, began to suffer. The soldiers, starving and freezing, found it increasingly difficult to maintain their momentum. By loudly declaring his intention to capture Moscow, Charles made it clear that he would not divert from this path. This allowed Peter to lay traps along the route, drawing Charles deeper into Russian territory. Charles's promise to march directly to Moscow forced him to maintain an aggressive pace, stretching his supply lines to the breaking point. Peter exploited this by ensuring there was nothing left for the Swedish army to forage. Charles's public commitment to total victory left him no room to retreat or adapt. Any deviation from his boasts would be seen as a failure, both by his soldiers and his allies. This rigid mindset played directly into Peter's hands. As Charles's army marched deeper into Russia, the reality of Peter's strategy became clear. Villages and crops were abandoned and burned, and the Russian winter began to set in. Starvation and freezing temperatures decimated the Swedish forces, but Charles refused to retreat, bound by his earlier proclamations of victory. By the time Charles reached Poltava in 1709, his once mighty army was a shadow of its former self. Peter, with his more flexible approach, gathered his forces, waiting for the right moment to strike. He had learned from Charles's public threats and movements, and he knew exactly when and where to act. At the Battle of Poltava, Peter struck decisively. His forces, though smaller, were better prepared and positioned. Peter's strategy relied on patience and surprise, with Russian forces laying in wait for Charles's overstretched and exhausted army. The Swedish forces, still reeling from the harsh conditions, were unable to respond effectively. Charles's army was crushed, and Charles himself was forced to flee, ending his reign of dominance in the region. The Battle of Poltava ended in a crushing defeat for Charles, forcing him to flee and marking the end of Sweden's dominance in Europe. Charles, trapped by his earlier boasts and unable to pivot, was utterly defeated. The defeat at Poltava shattered Sweden's dominance and marked the rise of Russia as a European power. Interpretations. The story of Charles XIII and Peter the Great reveals that noise and bravado often lead to downfall. Charles's grand speeches and bold proclamations of invincibility gave Peter the Great all the information he needed to anticipate and counter his moves. By committing publicly to his boasts, Charles boxed himself into a rigid strategy, unable to adapt without risking humiliation. His own words became a trap, turning his strength into a weakness. Peter's victory was not just one of strategy, but of restraint. By withholding his intentions and letting Charles reveal his, Peter maintained control over the pace and direction of the conflict. His silence allowed him to adapt, surprise, and ultimately outmaneuver his opponent, just like a game of chess. Adaptability over rigidity. Where Charles refused to adapt for fear of losing face, Peter adjusted his strategy as the situation evolved, ensuring that he could exploit every weakness in the Swedish army. The lesson is clear. Avoid the temptation to announce your plans, boast of your abilities, or intimidate with noise. Loud words may inspire or intimidate, but they also betray your intentions and/or create expectations which limit your ability to adapt. Key lessons and takeaways. Loose lips. Sink ships. Revealing too much about your plans can give your enemies the upper hand. Speak carefully, especially when your words can be used against you. Words, if used unwisely, can betray your intentions and limit your options. Speak only when necessary, and let your deeds make the loudest impact. Silence is a weapon. Use it wisely. Public commitments to a single course of action can trap you. Keep your options open to adapt as circumstances change. When leaders announce their intentions boldly, they not only inform their adversaries, but also bind themselves to fulfilling those promises to maintain credibility. This rigidity can lead to disastrous consequences when unexpected challenges arise, as the leader's focus shifts from making the best decision to avoiding perceived failure or humiliation. Silence is a weapon. Silence can be one of the most powerful weapons in a leader's arsenal, offering an edge that words often cannot. In the absence of declarations, silence creates mystery, leaving adversaries uncertain about intentions or plans. It withholds critical information, forcing opponents to act on assumptions rather than facts. This lack of clarity often leads to hesitation, missteps, or overcorrection by the opposing side. By withholding information, you retain control over your narrative and deny your opponents the ability to counter your moves. Know your enemy. Understanding how your words will motivate or inform your opponent is as important as the actions you take. Finally, in leadership, strategy, and life, the lesson is clear. Remember that to speak less is to see more. By withholding your words, you retain the flexibility to change direction, surprise your adversaries, and seize opportunities as they emerge. Power is not only about presence, but about unpredictability, which is born from quiet strength. Reversal of the proverb. The reversal of the proverb, Theodore Roosevelt and the Great White Fleet, the strategic roar. In the early 20th century, Theodore Roosevelt, the 26th President of the United States, sought to establish America as a global naval power. At the time, the United States had begun to expand its influence beyond its borders, but its position as a world power was still uncertain. To assert America's presence on the global stage and deter potential adversaries, Roosevelt undertook a bold and unprecedented strategy. The launch of the Great White Fleet, a dazzling display of naval power. He believed in quiet diplomacy, backed by strong and capable action. But Roosevelt understood that there are times when staying quiet is not enough, when making noise is necessary to show strength and secure respect. The early 1900s were a time of geopolitical shifts. The rise of Japan as a naval power, after its victory in the Russo-Japanese War, 1904 to 1905, signalled a new challenge in the Pacific. Roosevelt wanted to ensure that Japan and other nations recognised the United States as a formidable force in the region. Europe was still dominated by colonial powers like Britain, Germany and France, and Roosevelt sought to position the US as their equal in terms of military strength and influence. Roosevelt was a firm believer in Alfred Thayer Mahan's principles of naval power. Mahan argued that a strong navy was essential for national greatness and global influence. Roosevelt sought to modernise and expand the US Navy to match these ideals. Internal and external perceptions. Domestically, Roosevelt faced skepticism about America's ability to project power abroad. Internationally, the US was seen as a regional power, not yet in the league of European empires or Japan. Roosevelt needed a bold move to change both perceptions. He ordered the construction of a fleet of powerful battleships, later called the Great White Fleet. Roosevelt's Great White Fleet was a fleet of 16 gleaming battleships painted in white, symbolising peace and modernity, with gilded trim. His speeches emphasised the fleet as a symbol of progress, strength, and the readiness of the US to defend its interests anywhere in the world. This bold display was Roosevelt's roar. It wasn't about threatening war, it was about commanding respect. Roosevelt's noise wasn't just for show, it was backed by real strength and preparation. In 1907, Roosevelt ordered the fleet on a 14-month voyage around the world, covering over 43,000 nautical miles and visiting ports across 6 continents. The fleet stopped at ports in countries like Japan, Australia and Britain, where leaders and citizens could see America's military strength with their own eyes. Roosevelt framed the mission as a peaceful demonstration of America's naval capabilities, but the underlying message was clear. The United States has arrived as a global power, and any adversary should think twice before challenging its interests. Why the reversal worked. Visibility was needed. Staying silent might have made America look weak or unprepared. The bold display proved its power and capabilities. The roar was strategic. Roosevelt's fleet didn't just show off, it sent a clear and deliberate message to potential rivals. The fleet's route around the world was carefully chosen to maximize its impact. Japan had been expanding its influence in the Pacific, but after seeing the fleet, its leaders took a more cautious approach. A key stop, given the rising tensions in the Pacific. Roosevelt wanted to assert dominance while maintaining diplomatic cordiality. Europe. Stops in Mediterranean ports reminded the great colonial powers that the US was now their equal on the seas. South America. The fleet reinforced US influence in the Western Hemisphere under the Monroe Doctrine. How Roosevelt's roar worked. Unlike leaders whose boldness backfired, Roosevelt's roar through the Great White Fleet succeeded because it was created by careful strategy and preparation. Roosevelt made no secret of his intentions. By openly declaring the fleet's mission, he invited global attention and ensured its journey would be seen as a historic moment rather than a provocation. The transparency of the mission diffused potential fears of aggression, framing it as a gesture of goodwill while still projecting power. The fleet's success relied on meticulous planning. Supply ships ensured the fleet was never without coal, and port visits were coordinated to showcase American naval engineering and discipline. Unlike Charles' overextension in Russia, Roosevelt ensured his roar was sustainable and backed by robust logistical support. Adaptability, the voyage was not just a demonstration, but also an opportunity to identify weaknesses in the US Navy. The fleet encountered mechanical challenges and logistical hurdles, which provided valuable lessons for future naval operations. Roosevelt used these insights to further modernize the Navy, ensuring that the roar of the Great White Fleet translated into lasting strength. Unlike Charles XIII, whose proclamations revealed strategic vulnerabilities, Roosevelt ensured that the Great White Fleet was more than just a spectacle. It was a genuine demonstration of the United States' naval power, backed by preparation and resources. Control the narrative. Roosevelt's ability to manipulate perception was key. By framing the voyage as a peaceful gesture, he diffused potential hostility while ensuring the fleet's true message, US dominance, was unmistakable. Roosevelt tailored his message to resonate with both allies and potential adversaries. The fleet's journey reinforced US influence in the Western Hemisphere, showcased strength to Japan, and positioned America as an equal to Europe's great powers. Possible downsides of the reversal. What if the bluff was called? Had rival nations chosen to test the Great White Fleet, the consequences could have been significant. If your adversary is highly composed and rational, for example Russia and/or Japan, they may see through the no eyes for what it truly is, a distraction or an exaggeration. Instead of panicking, they might double down on analysing your true capabilities, rendering your roaring tactic ineffective. A direct confrontation, even a limited one such as a naval exercise, might have revealed the fleet's vulnerabilities in coordination, firepower, or endurance. Loss of credibility. If the voyage had ended in failure or humiliation, it would have damaged Roosevelt's reputation and weakened America's standing in global affairs. The risk of over-promising and under-delivering loomed large over the entire journey. Conclusion: the fine balance. The proverb, "A roaring lion kills no game," teaches the value of silence, observation, and subtlety. Staying quiet allows you to see more, adapt to changing circumstances, and act decisively without revealing your intentions. However, the reversal reminds us that there are moments when a roar, bold action, and visibility is necessary to command respect, deter threats, or inspire confidence. The key is knowing when to apply each approach. Silence provides flexibility and unpredictability, but a well-timed roar, backed by strength, can seize opportunities and shift the balance of power. Whether you choose quiet observation or bold proclamation, the ultimate wisdom lies in using your voice or withholding it with purpose and precision. The next time you feel the urge to share your plans or prove your strength, ask yourself, will this roar help me succeed or scare away the game I'm chasing? If you enjoyed exploring the fascinating stories behind the wisdom of proverbs and historical strategies, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Hit the bell icon so you never miss out on more intriguing content that dives deep into the lessons of the past and how they shape the present. And if you'd like to support us further and help bring more content like this to life, consider joining our community on Patreon. The link is in the description. Your support allows us to dive deeper, share more stories, and continue exploring the wisdom of the past. Thank you for being part of the journey.